Okay, good morning. Okay, after we talk about research management in the last week sessions, we're going to move on to the following topic, which is kind of sensitive and also important for us to know because in nowadays property rights and also intellectual property is considered as one of the laws that we need to obey, and it's also related to the ethics that every scientist and as well as students in science and engineering need to follow in order to avoid violation in terms of regulations and also the law itself. Okay, so as we see from the title, how to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is basically the act of, well, in a simplistic way, is just like an act of copy and paste something that is not belong to our property. That is the simplest definition that I can give. Although in Cambridge, not Cambridge, but Oxford Advanced Learner Dictionary, plagiarism can be defined as something. Sorry. Let me show you just the definition instead, directly, instead of just saying, because I'm not really sure what is the correct definition from Oxford itself. But let me see. I think I have a brief definition that is coming out from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary instead of Cambridge. But let us go through the following slides, which are taken from the passages that is given in Against Plagiarism book, written by Helen Chang, which is published in 2016. Okay, so today's lecture is we're going to see what plagiarism is, and then how to avoid plagiarism as author, and also how we detect potential plagiarism. Okay, so as I mentioned before, plagiarism is defined in several dictionaries. Okay, one of them is Merriam-Webster's definition. It's an act of instant of plagiarism or something that is plagiarized. And then the definition of plagiarize itself is a verb. Okay, is an act to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one owns. Okay, use another production without crediting the source. Okay, another definition: plagiarize or the act of plagiarism is to commit literary theft, present as new and original an idea or a product derived from an existing source. Okay, so these are the definition that is coming from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, that basically used in the American English usage, especially those, especially English that are spoken in the North American continent. However, in Oxford, let me see whether I have the book itself. Let me see. See, plagiarism. Okay. Oh, nggak ada ya? Oh, ini dia. Plagiarism. Okay. In the Oxford's The Advanced Learner Dictionary of Current English, plagiarism is an act of plagiarize, where plagiarize itself defined as take and use example in an essay, somebody else's ideas, word, etc., as if they were one's own. So that plagiarism is the act of plagiarizing, and then plagiarist is the person who conduct plagiarism. Okay. So there are several definitions depending on dictionaries, but also there is a legal definition of plagiarism itself, and it depends from one country to another. Okay, so the United States definition of plagiarism, especially in the scientific field, will be different to those defined in United Kingdom or in Australia, in the European Union, in Russia, in China, Japan, Indonesia, etc., and so on. But the common thing from those several definitions is that plagiarism, or the act of plagiarize itself, is basically we use someone else's idea without citing or without crediting the original source that we take. So we basically, as I mentioned earlier, the easiest definition, in my opinion, is an act of copy and paste word, paragraph, or sentences that is taken from an original idea into our own work. Okay, so these are the definitions of plagiarism that we're going to learn in today's lecture. Okay, so the definition itself from the Against Plagiarism book. Okay, so I'm just using the definition given from Helen Zhang. So let me see. So here is the background story first. Okay, so many universities provide a clear guidance for students and faculty on their websites about academic standards, including codes of conduct for authors, which naturally incorporate advice on how to avoid plagiarism. Even in reputable university, they also have their own rules on how to avoid plagiarism, even though the definition or the laws that is governing about the plagiarism itself is, I guess, in the United States, I guess there is some kind of a federal law that govern the not govern, but that prohibit the act of plagiarism itself. But each university there have their own rules how to avoid them, in terms of to clarify or to make a clearer definition or to make additional rules, okay, in order to avoid it. Okay, and here is one example from United Kingdom, coming out from Oxford University website, that stated that plagiarism is presenting someone else's work or ideas as your their consent by incorporating it into your work without full acknowledgement. Okay, so here also the act of copy and paste without acknowledgement, okay, needs to be highlighted here, because in all of the definition, the main theme or the main or the common thing that is coming up from those definitions are copy and paste and without acknowledgement. Okay, all published and unpublished material, whether it's in manuscript, printed, or electronic form, is covered under this definition. Okay, so it's not only in papers, but also in electronic forms, such as in videos or an electronic book, etc., and so on. As long as we didn't acknowledge the original author, then it will be considered as plagiarism. Plagiarism may be intentional or reckless, or unintentional. Under the regulation for examination, intentional or reckless plagiarism is a disciplinary offense. So whether it is intentional or unintentional, students and scientists must be aware that both are considered as disciplinary offense. And then on some university, doing it recklessly, okay, doing plagiarism recklessly is considered as breaking the law, okay, breaking the law of the campus itself, such that the punishment of those who are conducting those violations will be terminated from the school itself, and it will be expelled from the school. Okay, so that is the rule given from Oxford University regulations. In Harvard, okay, in Harvard University studies states clearly that in academic writing, it is considered plagiarism to draw any ideas or any language from someone else without adequately crediting that source in your paper. Okay, so whether it is a translation of a foreign papers or a foreign sources, and then we translate it into our own language, it's still considered as plagiarism unless we gave acknowledgement that this sentence is coming from the original book or from the original paper, etc. and so on. It doesn't matter whether the source is published author, another student, a website without clear authorship, a website that sells academic papers or any other person, taking credit for anyone else's work is stealing, and it is unacceptable in all academic situations, whether you do it intentionally or by accident. Okay, so these are the things that even for us, lecturer and researcher, need to be very, very careful when we are writing our papers. And also for you, student, when you are writing your final project report or final project thesis, that you must avoid at any cost the act of plagiarism, whether it is intentionally or unintentionally. Okay, so giving proper credit to original author that has that important sentence that is related to your work becomes necessary, because without it you will be considered as doing act of plagiarism. And if you get caught from a committee, okay, so I guess in foreign university, I think they do some kind of a random check from one thesis to another to see whether one student can produce a work, a manuscript, a report, or a paper that has the appropriate level of plagiarism. Okay, so sometimes from one university to another will have different threshold of similarity. Okay, so if in nowadays we have some kind of tools that can be used in order to check whether our writings are similar to those who are already published in the scientific communities. So using that plagiarism check or the similarity check, you can know that our work, whether it's free from plagiarism or have similarity below a certain threshold. So university, whether it's in Indonesia or in foreign countries, they have their own rules stating how much similarity that one paper or one thesis project can have. The best one, obviously, is to have none of similar content. However, it is true that sometimes, especially those who have many publications, and then the author will cite a certain subject from similar paper that he already published in the past. That similarity cannot be avoided because it is basically telling the audience about the continuity of his own work, about the continuity or the progress of a certain scientific research. So 100% no similarity becomes difficult, especially for those who are a beginner writer, okay, a beginner writer, and for those who have experience in working on research, because he have to mention about the past research that is related to the current one. Okay, so sometimes 100% no similarity cannot be conducted because the author needs to show about the continuity of the research itself. However, on the other hand, if the similarity is related not to that point, okay, it is more on the act of copy and paste someone else's work into our own, then it will be obvious that the act itself, or the investigation itself, is related to the act of plagiarism. So I think in ITB, I guess in ITB, the rules of similarity, or the level of similarity phrases or sentences that one student or one researcher could have, I think it was below 10%, if I'm not mistaken, and therefore students need also to follow that rule, especially for those who are interested to publish their work in reputable publications. And also, if you are writing your thesis report, final project report in Indonesian, the similarity check will also look for the words written in Indonesian, or sentences written in Indonesian, or phrases, or table, or graph information, etc., and so on. And so the act of avoiding plagiarism is not only matters when you are writing scientific papers for publishing in scientific journals abroad, but also in national scope. Okay, because nowadays, I guess the government conducted by the Ministry of Culture and Education, and also I guess from the Ministry of Culture and Education, Research and Technology, I guess they have set, or they are planning to set, rules on how to avoid, how to not to conduct plagiarism, and I guess the rules itself is going to be prepared by the ministry, but I don't think that in our law itself the rules or the act of plagiarism is governed by a certain law, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm not that aware whether the act of plagiarism is considered as breaching of intellectual property, unless there is a violation in terms of patent, in terms of creative work, such as movies, and then radio shows, and then TV shows, etc., and so on. And then I don't think that there is some kind of a, well, I think there is a law related to the selling of fake goods, or selling of unauthorized goods, but I don't think that there is a certain law that controls, or that take measures about plagiarism other than rules set by the Ministry of Education and Research. Okay, that's what I know, and therefore the rules and regulation that is managing this issue usually is given to the each universities, and also to the publishing, okay, such as the publisher from Erlangga, for example, and then the publisher of ITB, and then publisher of UGM Press, and then the publisher of Mizan, etc., and so on. So those publishers who are basically going to conduct similarity check in order to avoid claims from the original author that one will have. Okay. Okay. So why do people plagiarize? And then why would someone risk their reputation by committing such serious misconduct? There are a number of possible reasons for plagiarism, including the following. So first one is the increased pressure to publish, because if scientists could not publish something in a certain period or in a certain occupational degree or in a certain occupational title, then he will be evaluated as not productive, and then he will be considered as not expecting the institution's goals, and therefore can be considered for termination of one's jobs. Okay, so especially in the foreign university in the United States, in Europe, etc., and so on, one lecturer or one scientist or one researcher will be evaluated by his work in terms of publishing papers. So if he could not manage to publish one paper in a year, in a certain year, or in a certain period of evaluation, then he'll be considered as not productive, and therefore termination of his position can be considered, because he is not meeting the expectation of the institution where he is hired. Okay, so the pressure is come from the regulation that he must publish certain paper in a certain period. And then the act of copy and pasting someone else's work itself is an easy act. Okay, because it's so easy to just copy and paste something from Wikipedia, for example, in our own work. And then it is basically the thing that is commonly done in high schools, and even now probably in elementary schools. Students also already introduced to Wikipedia, and then he just took the material from Wikipedia into his own essay, for example. The act itself, the copy and pasting without telling the source or the original author itself, is, as we already saw earlier, is an act of plagiarism. And therefore, since the beginning, okay, since elementary school, students need to, or people in general needs to understand that in order for us to make an essay that is properly written, one need to acknowledge that someone else's word or someone else's ideas that is taken from Wikipedia needs to be acknowledged. Okay, so it is okay for us if we don't have any original ideas, as long as we acknowledge that this idea is coming from a certain authors, okay, from a certain author, and then we state that this ideas is coming from a certain book that the original author is written, for example. So from utilizing that principle in the early stage, students in college becomes used to the act of acknowledging someone else's works. Okay. However, in reality is that in elementary school, in junior high, and also in high school, this act is often not regarded. People tend to forget that acknowledging someone else's work inside of our own is something that is ethically good. Okay, and then that is the proper thing on how we write an essay. If we don't have any original idea, or if we have some kind of inspiration that is taken from a certain book or a certain paper, then we need to acknowledge that original source as our source of inspiration or source of ideas, before we moving on to the additional thing that we need to add in order to explain our work in more details. Okay, so first, acknowledging someone else's work needs to be properly learned. Okay, needs to be properly people need to have that experience of how to give a proper acknowledgement to someone else's idea. And then people also need to make some kind of an additional thing in order to avoid the similarity of our work with the original ideas. Okay, so if we take the original idea as our own and we acknowledge it, and then we basically copy and paste everything from the original work into our own, that then even if we have that acknowledgement, or we have that reference that stating that this work is basically not our own, and then it is entirely coming out from the original author, then why should we write an essay in the first place? Okay, so in order to so for us, in order to have original ideas, or some kind of a thing that is fruitful from our study, is that we need to make some kind of an innovation that was inspired from the original authors. Okay, so what I want to say is that acknowledging someone else's ideas that becomes our inspiration is one thing, and also to make some kind of an innovation or something additional terms or improvement of the original ideas or the original passage is another thing. Okay, so basically what we need to do is to have both things, acknowledging someone else's ideas as part of our source of inspiration, and also not to copy and paste entirely from the original source as our own, because we need to make some kind of innovation or adding something different into our essay, or into our paper, or into our study, etc., and so on. So these are the things that needs to be learned from in the early stage, so that when we are in college, in graduate study, or even in doctorate level, or when we write our thesis, dissertation, final project, etc., and so on, we already get used to that action. Because if we are not, then this act of plagiarism is still going to continue in the future. Okay, and then the third reason of why plagiarism is happening is due to the fact that many conduct of plagiarism is done by students who are not coming from the United States. So this publication, okay, I'm going back to this cover. So Helen Zhang itself, I guess she was a lecturer, I guess, or some kind of an editor, or let us see the original text itself. Okay, stop share. Let us see through the original text itself. Let me see. Okay. 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 Helen Jung itself, she is a. Okay, this is Alan Morris. Okay, let me see. Is there any is there any information about the I wrote this book. Okay, I guess she was a scientist and also an editor of a certain publication in the UK. Okay, and she noticed that people who comes to the UK and pursue graduate study there, especially in the countries where English is not their first language. Okay, they tend to copy and paste the English language paper because of its easiness, etc., and so on, and also because in the original countries where they are coming from, the act of plagiarism itself is not considered as a violation conduct. Okay, so in one aspect, the students feels that English writing in the English language itself is difficult. The second part is that the act of plagiarism in their respective countries is not considered as violation conduct itself. So they kind of used to with the conduct, okay, with the conduct. So when they are moving to the United Kingdom's university or Canadian universities or American universities, they still brought their not tradition, but they brought their common thing or things that is commonly done in their home countries into the new country. Okay, so in the new country, they have set of rules that stating that plagiarism is basically is a violation conduct of the academic rules, and also in intellectual property law itself. So they didn't aware that in this country intellectual property is highly upheld. Okay, so those are also part of the reason why plagiarism is conducted by students. And then so the first three is kind of easy to understand why plagiarism is happening. The fourth one is the misplaced respect of others' work, because sometimes in the past, especially when the access of international journals or scientific journals in the past is not done in online, and then many of them are separated or divided by certain ideology or politics. For example, publication on Russian Journal of Science is not accessible from the United States, and vice versa. Some publication in the United States cannot be accessed in the Soviet Union or in China in the 80s and 70s, so that the act of plagiarism unintentional, okay, unintentional plagiarism do occur in this time period. However, nowadays, when many publications have their online record, the act of plagiarism becomes a little bit difficult. Becomes difficult basically because they have that record, okay, of documents that always or that regularly feeds into a certain software, where each software will recognize each sentences from the newest publication coming out from a certain period. For example, they update the publication monthly or weekly or daily, okay, and the publisher itself will feed the machines where they can recognize certain paper, so that if one would like to check their work using that software, they will know that it has some kind of a similarity with the existing publication. Okay, so the misplaced respect of other work is usually happen when the access of a certain publication is limited. Okay, but nowadays this limitation could be upheld due to the fact that we are in the 20th century, where everything is available online. So we can check whether our work or whether our writings is specific have similarities with others if we have that proper tools. Okay, and then the last two is lack of suitable training, and then lack of awareness of rule for acknowledgement of other works. Okay, so this is the main point that I'm saying this morning, that we need to have that exposure, that understanding that plagiarism can be done intentionally or unintentionally, and it needs to be trained from our early stage, especially from the elementary school years. Because if we don't have that, if we don't have that training, if we don't have that exposure, or if we don't have experience, okay, that acknowledging someone else's ideas and work is important, and not to copy and paste entire thing from one source into our own is also need to be emphasized, so that we do have that experience not doing that. Okay. In our own journals, we have identified 9 types of plagiarism. So in our own journals is the journals published by the, as I mentioned earlier, Howenjine is an editor of a certain publication, okay, in the UK. So she said that in their own journals, they have identified 9 types of plagiarism. Okay, one is self-plagiarism without identification and acknowledgement. So self-plagiarism is basically when we are going to write a paper that is based on our final project thesis. Okay, so even though the author is ourselves, okay, even though the group of writers is coming basically from the original work, but in the new publication or in the new paper, they still need to acknowledge that original source, even though the writer is the same, with the proper recognition, okay, with the proper rules. Because if not, the committee or the editor of one publication will see that this is a pirated is a pirated materials or improper material that is written in the new paper. Okay, so even though the paper itself is written by ourselves, we still need to acknowledge it using the proper rules as we are citing someone else's work. Okay, and then cutting and pasting of other work without identification and acknowledgement. That is the second reason. Oh, sorry, the second type of plagiarism. And then the third one is the replication of method sections without clear statement of the source, and then republication of conference paper with little added value. Okay, so this is also things that is happening also in the scientific communities in Indonesia, because one scientist write the same thing from one proceeding to another, and then the same paper that he present in the proceeding is entirely the same with the thing that he published in a certain paper. Okay, maybe the laws governing this is not present in Indonesia at the moment, but in outside, but in foreign countries or in the foreign publication, editors from both institutions, whether the one proceeding is published and one respectable publication, their editor will check. Okay, where their editor will check whether there is a similarities of the paper in the database. So so the act of publishing the same material or a topic which doesn't have any additional values from one proceeding into one scientific journal, they tend to reject those type of publication because there are no additional, or there are no innovation, or there are no novelty that will benefit the improvement of the science itself. Okay, so the editor of one scientific publication will also consider what is the merit, what is the goal, or what is the advantages if this publication is going to publish. Because if there is no added value, if there is no novelty, there's no innovation that is coming out from the preceding paper, then this paper is not suitable for publication at all. It's need to be remain as a proceeding. Okay, so and sadly, it is something that is still happening in Indonesia due to the fact that the first reason, as I mentioned earlier, okay, there is an increased pressure to publish, because if you don't publish, you don't get funded. If you're not published, you will not get raised. If you're not published, you will not get promotion, etc., and so on. And therefore, republication of preceding paper into scientific paper without any additional values tends to occur often in our countries. Okay, and then a review paper, and then the other type of plagiarism is a review paper which largely replicate previously published content. So it's basically so the content of the review paper is the same as the original one, even though review paper tend to basically conclude or summarize the thing that already published in some decades, okay, on some period of time, but the summary itself is basically similar to the original work, okay, similar to the original. And then another type of plagiarism is the plagiarism of ideas, a wholesale plagiarism of previously published text, and then republication in translation without acknowledgement. So this also happened when researchers who coming from Indonesia, China, India, and then the sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern European countries, they have their own publication. They actually already have a paper written in Indonesian or in their native languages, but then they translate it into English. Okay, so it's basically so the researchers or the student basically translate their previous work from the original text in their original language into English without any additional work. from it. So so it's basically a translation, and then this English translated paper is sent to a certain publication, and lucky for them, the database that they have already knew about the publication, the original publication, even though it is written in the original language. Okay, so I think I haven't checked what is the latest improvement that one similarity check can have, but if a similarity check software nowadays also can translate multi-languages, then the act of plagiarism itself could be controlled and can be limited, because they have that ability to know one original sentences that is coming out from original paper, okay, from the original countries. So translated paper, okay, could not. So the translated paper could be detected easily, okay, using that database if they have that capability in translating the languages. Okay. Okay, academic journal editors around the world have huge responsibility. So this is therefore why Helen Chang write this book. They are in the position of being able to detect and therefore stop plagiarism. While with cross-check and other similarity tools have become invaluable for journal editors, however, all they can actually do is highlighting strings of similar text. Plagiarism cannot be accurately identified solely by finding these strings. Closer examination is always needed. So there are teams of editors, especially in reputable publication, that hire people to read and check the whole sentences inside of one's paper. Okay, if they found there is high percentage of similarity, then they will report to their superior, and the superior will tell the editor, and the editor will tell the author about the matter, about the problem, okay, that they found after several months. They have detected that the work is detected to have similar content with some original publications. Okay, and the conclusion reached and action taken may differ between discipline and in different countries. So, for example, for those who have this violation, okay, there are possible consequences. One, the simplest one is that they need to retract their submitted paper, or even if it's already published into a certain period, then the publication will be retracted, and then the author will send some kind of a letter that telling them that that they were sorry, that violation has been conducted, etc., and so on. But if the process itself becomes so stiff, becomes so hard to manage, sometimes the determination or the author of that paper can be blacklisted from that publication and also from other publication as well. Okay, so after one example, or after one case is happening for a certain author is exposed that he already that he conduct plagiarism in one of the paper that he sent to that certain publication. If the process becomes harder between the exchange of editor, publisher, and also the author, then the termination of all publication that you have in that paper could happen. okay, and all publication can be retracted, etc., and so on. So it is a very career-changing moment for a certain people if he got caught of doing plagiarism. Okay, so avoiding plagiarism as an author. As an author, in order to avoid plagiarism, the best way is learning and compliance with the basic principles of good academic from your academic career starting. And as signaled by the University of Oxford's website, avoiding plagiarism is not simply a matter of making sure your references are all correct, okay, or changing enough words so the examiner will not notice your paraphrase. It is about deploying your academic skills to make your work as good as it can be. Okay, so it's not just putting the references into a proper in a proper way. It's not a matter of paraphrasing. Okay, but it's basically how we use our academic skills so that our writings becomes our own writings. Okay, so that is the main point that the University of Oxford tell their students need to obey. We can know these rules are fundamental to the integrity of research, whether it is undertaken. In other words, if you are an honest scientific author, you have to fulfill the responsibility, even though the responsibility is hard. Okay, some publishers also provide guidance on their websites for author. For example, Elsevier offer educational material for authors on ethics in research and publication. And Wiley Blackwell has its best practice guidelines on publication ethics that can be accessed in this website over here. That is written in English, Chinese, and Japanese respectively. Okay. Particularly based on its author service, author will learn not only what are both broad ethical issues and practical points, but also be aware of principles of transparency that require author must let the reader know who did the work and has the work been published before in order to avoid plagiarism and promote research integrity. So the basic principle to ensure that author avoids plagiarism, other author work should always be treated with the same respect that you would wish for your own work. That means you're not relying excessively on quoted materials. Okay, do not excessively quoted materials. If you nothing new to add, don't write it. Always identifying the source of idea, word, data, figures, etc., with full citation to the originally published source, whether the work is your own or someone else's. Okay, and then the third one is always identifying actual quotation from someone else's work with no quotation mark or indentation. Bear in mind that copyright issues are likely to arise if you are quoting substantial passage from anyone else's work. You will need to seek original publisher permissions. Even if you reword, rephrase, summarize, or translate someone else's writing, you should still credit the original source. Okay, the last part is how to detect potential plagiarism. There are now a variety of online tools available which can be compared a submitted text with text already in its database. For example, there is cross-check, and then there is tools given from academic manuscript literature checking from the from China National Knowledge Infrastructure, and then I guess in ITB we use Turnitin, okay, and then we also use other similarity check that is officially purchased by ITB. I kind of forget what is the software, but I do remember that we have the access to Turnitin that your advisor and lecturer regularly use before they're sending a certain paper into a certain publication. And these tools enable journal editors to check submitted materials against large databases of already published content and to produce succinct statistical report of the amount of similar and identical wording found. Okay, so as long as your similarity check result is under a certain threshold, then you no need to worry about the thing that you already work. Okay, so as long as you are writing and developing ideas by yourself, so that the whole paper, okay, the whole paper doesn't have a certain amount of similarity, then it can be considered as your own. Okay. Four distinct types of plagiarism are identified, which are considered sufficiently serious to be considered as a form of academic misconduct. First is the duplication of publication, and then self-plagiarism, and then direct copy of method section with new data inserted, and uncited or excessive extracts. Okay, so academia is not a perfect world. Inevitably, academic journals all over the world are likely to encounter this or similar problems. And so as editor, they have responsibility to promote professional ethics. However, it is up to editorial community to propose criteria and processes for handling this type of academic misconduct. And in this way, we can help to protect the copyright of original authors and promote the healthy development of academic journals. Okay, so those are the things that Helen Janks in her book of Against Plagiarism tells us, writers, students, how to avoid it, because copyright and also intellectual property rights becomes increasingly important, even though in Indonesia these tend to be forgotten. But if we are dealing with the science community outside, then we need to follow these rules. Okay, so another book that can be used also for our study. So this is, I'm just showing you for academic purpose. Okay, I'm not going to sell this to you, and then please. So since Against Plagiarism is part of the textbooks that our lecturer used, okay, so it is okay. Okay, so it is okay for us to study the material. Okay, even though we don't have the original textbook of this publication. But I think I saw this. I saw one copy of this book in the ITB Central Library, if I'm not mistaken. So if you need to look out for the original text, you can use the access from the ITB Central Library, so that you can have guidance directly from this book. Okay, so I'm not going to promote you to download or to access this book unofficially. Okay, unofficially. So therefore, if you do have access, or if you do have proper access or official access to this book, then I would highly recommend you to read it, so that you can take knowledge from it and do your best effort in order to avoid this problem in terms of plagiarism. Okay, so this is the book from Helen Zhang. The other one, okay, let me stop share here. The other one that is also important in our field as a physicist. Okay, as a physicist, we also have this book, Ethics in Science, Ethical Misconduct in Scientific Research. Okay, so here in the Ethics in Science, the author is John D'Angelo from the United States, if I'm not mistaken. He described that plagiarism is not only the problem in scientific writing or in scientific communications. Okay, the things that also related to the ethics in researching itself. How we get our source, how we get our ingredient, how we get our test of subject, and then many other things that is not covered in the Against Plagiarism is covered in this book. Okay, so in the ethics of scientific, ethics in science, ethical misconduct in scientific research, John DiAngelo said that scientific misconduct consists of several things. First is the intentional negligence in acknowledgement of previous work. So this is basically part of things that Hao and Zhang note as plagiarism, and then deliberate fabrication of data. Okay, so in Hao and Zhang's publication, fabrication of data is not mentioned. Okay, because she talk mostly about the act of copy and pasting of someone else's work, but not talking about the fabrication of data. Okay, so this is also happening in the scientific world, where in order to get fund, in order to get money, in order to get a patent, in order to get works or project from outside of their institution, they need to produce data that is correspond to their clients, and therefore they fabricate certain data in order to meet their the client's expectation. And so fabrication of data is also part of the scientific misconduct that happens in the scientific world. Okay, and then other thing that is happening in terms of scientific misconduct are deliberate omission of known data that does not agree with hypothesis. Okay, so if you have a certain data that have a sinusoidal curve, you only take the positive part of it and then tells everybody that the data is only that, without recognizing that it also have that negative part as well. Okay, so omitting known data from one original publication is also considered as an ethical misconduct. And then passing another researcher's data as one owns. Okay, so it is similar to plagiarism. And then publication of result without consent of all researchers is also part of scientific misconduct. So for example, you are a group of 4, but one author, but one member is not agree with the thing that you are doing with the publication, and therefore if you insist to publish that publication without the consent of this one person, then it will be considered as scientific misconduct. And then failure to acknowledge all researchers who perform the work. Okay, if you have a group of 4 people, you only recognize recognize the work from 3 people, for example, then it is also part of scientific misconduct. Or if you are working in a certain lab and you are using their facility, and then when you publish your paper, you didn't acknowledge or you didn't thank the head of the institution where you get the data, it is also part of scientific misconduct. And then failure to acknowledge, okay, and then the authorship and intellectual property is also part of the plagiarism issue that is happening as scientific misconduct. And then conflict of interest. Okay, conflict of interest also happens in scientific community. So for example, I guess one of the example for this one, probably I can take from the definition of hydrocarbon. For example, the generation or the process of how we produce petroleum can be organic and inorganic. And so the conflict of interest here is that people who uphold the theory where petroleum is basically coming from inorganic matter will reject everything that are coming from researchers who talk the otherwise. Okay, so for example, they talk about that the petroleum generation is inorganic, then it will be rejected entirely due to the conflict of interest from the people who consider that the generation of petroleum is inorganic. Okay. Okay, so that is the conflict of interest. Or for example, if one group of researchers tells that that a certain polymer is useful, and then the other part said that the polymer is not useful, then they will have that tug of war in certain publications that this materials is indeed beneficial or not beneficial at all. Okay, and then repeated publication of two similar results. So this is also already mentioned in Helen Zhang's book. And then breach of confidentiality. Okay, so for example, there is a data provided from National Intelligence Service, for example, or something that is or the data itself is sensitive to the for the outside. Sorry. So if you have data that is kind of sensitive, if you brought that to the public domain, so you need to be careful with the permission on how to release the data. Okay, because sometimes the data is so sensitive, or it contains sensitive material or sensitive issue if you publish it into a public domain. Okay, so you also need to be careful with the confidentiality issue that arise from that. And then misrepresenting other previous work. So for example, you misquoted, or you make some kind of a projections of someone else's ideas, or you basically misinterpret, or you mistranslate, or you actually didn't understand what the original author said, but you make your own definition based on the but you make sense that the original author say something that it is not the original one itself. Okay, so that is basically misrepresenting the other previous work. Okay, so so in the book, okay, there are also some kind of examples of cases on effect or what happens to those who violate responsible conduct. Okay, for when people use object, do they need to have permission to do that, or do they have some kind of a certificate, certain qualification, so that the becomes not violating the law, etc., and so on. And then what is the punishment, and then what is the consequences that one author will have if they found breaching the scientific misconduct rules of their university or their institution, etc., and so on. Okay, so what effect on the public does scientific misconduct have? For example, okay, so here, so in this book, John DiAngelo also provides some kind of an example on how scientific misconduct affect or apply to the public. So for example, there is some kind of a mistranslated issue between MMR and autism. Okay, so maybe due to the fact that there's some kind of a misinterpretation or conception, okay, between reader or between scientists. They tell that if one using MMR, okay, using MMR equipments to a certain patient, then it will increase the chance of having autism, etc., and so on. So it is something that is very sensitive for the public. So, and then, for example, the HIV vaccine issue, and then the climate change issue, the cold fusion issue, etc., and so on. Okay, so those are problems that can be arise if we do not properly do the rules. Okay, so if we do this scientific misconduct, the cost huge in terms of the interaction with the public itself. Okay. Okay, so can we prevent misconduct in research, etc., so on? And in the case study that happens in the past decades, etc., so on, is also provided in this book. So I would highly recommend you, if you have access to ethics in research, ethics in science, and also against plagiarism. Okay, the one that we are using for scientific communication is this one, against plagiarism. But the thing that is also covered in science in general is covered here in ethics in science. So if you do have access to these two publications, please read them. Okay, if you have any time to read. Okay, because so that you can okay, and then you so that you can also have that exposure to this issue whatsoever. Okay. Okay, so the other thing that I'm going to mention in the lecture, okay, I also provide you with a relevant videos in EduNext. So please do watch them, okay, so that you can have more exposure on this issue, on what is plagiarism, and then how to avoid it, and then detecting potential plagiarism, and how we paraphrase certain sentences from the original author into our own. Okay, because in order for us to have solid background, solid fundamental theories, or solid method, we do need to refer something from other book. We do need to we do need to copy something that is written in certain publication in order for us to have a solid background on our research. But copy and paste itself is not an act of plagiarism, but it becomes an act of plagiarism if we are not citing the original author itself, and we are not modifying our writings, okay, in a proper way. Okay, so we just copy and paste, and that's it. Okay, because the correct one is that after we copy and paste, we kind of arrange the form of the sentences, and then we write and then we paraphrase, or we basically change some word, or we change some orientation from passive to active, etc., and so on. So there are many ways to paraphrase some original work into our own, so that it can be beneficial for our construction of background, and also in basic theories. Okay, so these are the things that we're going to cover, okay, in today's lecture. I knew that it is relatively repetitive things that I might say in today's lecture, and it might bore you at certain point. But this issue needs to be addressed, because we as physics students need to know about this problem, okay, and we need to use our best effort in order to avoid this, okay, because we don't want to have issues later on when our word is going to be random check by some institution, and we don't want to have problem with it. Okay, so even though your final project report is not a scientific publication in respectable, reputable journals, but if we have that experience, if we have that, if we knew that this thing needs to be avoided and this thing needs to be followed in terms of academic rules, then your publication or your report should be okay for the publication as the final project report without any worry. Okay. Okay, so that's all for today's lecture. In Thursday, let me see. In Thursday, let me see our schedule. Okay, the schedule is written here, I guess, in lecture 1. Okay, our schedule, after we talk about plagiarism, we are going to review scientific literature. Okay, so we're going to, okay, let me open the screen once again so that we can go back to the first lecture of our class. Yeah, so this is taken from lecture 1. Okay, so we've talked about the how to choose research topic and research management last week, and then we already talked about how to avoid plagiarism in today's lecture. And therefore, in Thursday, we're going to review scientific literature, and then step involved in conducting research literature, practical screening criteria. So it's basically telling you how to search or how to look for scientific literature. Okay, we're going to I'm going to introduce you how to use Scopus and then Google Scholar, etc., and so on, so that you can have a better approach in terms of literature review, so that you can have solid background for your research, solid background for your final project report, and solid background for your studies. Okay, thank you all for attending the class. I hope everybody already signed for their attendance list. Thank you all for attending the class, and see you all again in Thursday. Okay, thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording.